It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Jonathon Bethard, who is an assistant professor of anatomy and neurobiology at the School of Medicine and an assistant professor of archaeology at the College of Arts and Sciences. Simply put, he is a biological anthropologist with research foci in forensic anthropology and bioarchaeology. And there's a lot of cool stuff here that I can't even pronounce, but let's just say he's super cool. He's worked in significantly in developing international study abroad programs, as well as an instructor for numerous courses in forensic anthropology with the International Criminal Investigative Training Assistance Program in Bogota, Colombia. He is also a faculty in residence at Miles Standish Hall. So let's welcome.
Hey, everybody. Quick shout out to all the Miles folks who are here. Hey, and Lower Bay State Road people. So I'm John. Thanks very much for that introduction. And I thought that I would start off my talk tonight with a quick question to the audience. Who has seen the show with these people? All right. So we all recognize Dr. Temperance Brennan sitting here at the microscope. And we know that from this program, we know that Tempe is a biological anthropologist like me. We know that she studies archaeological skeletons, but we know that she also looks at skeletons in forensic contexts. And so tonight what I'm going to do is not focus on some of the archaeological questions that I'm interested in, but I'm going to focus broadly on what it is that we in the field of forensic anthropology work on. And it's quite interesting because forensic anthropologists find ourselves working in many different sorts of contexts, right? Sometimes forensic anthropologists find ourselves working in criminal contexts where through different kinds of acts of homicide and very unfortunate things, criminals create all kinds of clandestine graves. And so they may commit a murder, they might commit some kind of crime that winds up in a dead body. People that create dead bodies want to hide dead bodies, so they bury dead bodies. And so what happens in many instances is that crime scenes are created, and forensic anthropologists like me and others might be called to excavate those remains. So we might be involved in a medical, legal, or a forensic context. In some instances, forensic anthropologists find ourselves working in a host of very complex and complicated international arenas, such as in this photo from Argentina, which is an excavation that took place to recover the remains of individuals who were disappeared during the Dirty War. And we can look around the world and find parts of other parts of Latin America, parts of Europe, parts of Asia, parts of the Pacific, where forensic anthropologists find ourselves working to identify missing people and to perhaps provide evidence as to who these people were, what happened to them, and perhaps even something to say about who ended up putting them there in these places. In other instances, forensic anthropologists find ourselves working in mass disaster contexts, and we can think about very unfortunate circumstances like natural disasters. This is a photograph on the sides from the 2010 earthquake that occurred in Haiti, and I am a member of a mass disaster response team that deployed to this place. You're looking at what used to be a 4-star hotel where our jobs were to recover all of those individuals who were in the hotel at the time of the earthquake. So the idea here is that forensic anthropologists find ourselves working in all sorts of very interesting, sometimes very tense, and sometimes very stressful contexts. So once we recover skeletonized remains, we're going to work on what is sort of the bread and butter of forensic anthropology, and that is the development of what is oftentimes called a biological profile. And this biological profile is the kind of information that we can tease out from skeletal remains to offer some clues as to who individuals were. And this biological profile typically consists of 4 primary pieces of information, 2 of which I'll talk about tonight. 1 is the sex of the individual, 2 is the age at which they died, so were they 20, were they 80? We are good at understanding how tall people were, estimating their stature, and also pretty good at estimating the region of origin for what a person's ancestry might be. So, a little bit of basic biological anthropology and bone anatomy right now. You might say, how do forensic anthropologists look at a set of skeletonized remains and tell someone's sex? Well, we can look at a pelvis. If I had a pelvic bone here, I wanted to bring one, but I wasn't sure if I could walk up Comm Ave with a box of bones. So we can look at hip bones, and because of the phenomena of our species' evolutionary history and the fact that women have evolved to give birth, we know that we can look at a pelvis and figure out that female pelvic dimensions are a little bit wider. So on the right-hand side, we can see a female pelvis. On the male side, we can see, or the left side, we can see a male. So we're really good at estimating sex if you've got a pelvis. We are also pretty good at estimating sex if you've got a skull. So on the left is a male, on the right a female. We look at things like a brow ridge. Everybody take your finger, put your finger behind your ear, feel a bump. This bump is called a mastoid process. Men typically have bigger mastoid processes than females. So in this image, this guy has a much bigger mastoid than the female on the right-hand side. So we can use that kind of information to automatically exclude 50% of the population. Now, if we're interested in questions about knowing how old people were, we can look at things like dental age. How many people here have wisdom teeth or that are coming in or that maybe they've taken out, right? Everybody here knows about wisdom teeth. They come in as we become more wise. So we could use something like our teeth to come up with an age estimate. If you don't have teeth or if you're beyond the age of teeth being useful, we can use another part of the pelvis. These are inside of you right now. This is a structure in your body called the pubic symphysis. The pubic symphysis is the joint surface where the two halves of your pelvis come together. On the left-hand side are college students, probably 18 to 20-year-olds. Some of us faculty are probably here in this side. Some of the other, some of my colleagues on the med campus might be on the far left. So we can use this information to come up broadly with how old folks are. We know that the body changes very predictably. Now, we can also look at skeletonized remains and look at other sorts of information beyond the biological profile. So this image demonstrates what I'm talking about in terms of thinking about how individual skeletons can be analyzed for all kinds of traumatic injuries. Sometimes, in the case of this rib cage of a child, people who commit child abuse will sometimes leave a bony record on the skeleton of that young person. So in this instance, we can look at these ribs and see these large swollen deposits of where these bones have healed. So this is an example of an injury that a person sustained during their life. So we're good at looking at antemortem trauma. We're also very good at understanding the patterns of trauma that can be presented in skeletons around the time of people's deaths, which are what forensic anthropologists typically call perimortem injuries. And perimortem injuries are things that result from being whacked over the head or hit with an axe or impacted with a bullet. So that, for example, we can look at this cranium and know that the picture on the top is an entry wound and the picture on the bottom right is from the exit. So if you know the way in which a bullet entered a bone, you can say something about the direction of fire, where was the person standing in the relation to the person who fired the gun, etc. So we're good at teasing this out. And also, and this is going to freak you out if you have pets or if you are an animal lover, we are also good at understanding how the skeleton is modified in a post-mortem interval, such by different kinds of critters in our homes or in the wild, etc. So on the left-hand side, we see a picture of a person's zygomatic bone or their cheekbone that's been gnawed by some rodents, and we've seen on the left-hand or the right-hand side a femur, a femoral hip socket that's been gnawed on by some kind of carnivore. So we're able to sort of tease these things out and tell a medical examiner, a coroner, a prosecutor, whomever, a whole kind of history that a skeleton may have gone through prior to our analysis. So there's a lot that we can tease out from skeletons. You might say, well, you mentioned some international things. You mentioned international events. Really, are is the phenomena of missing people a problem here in the United States? And the answer absolutely is yes. A few years ago, the United States Department of Justice created a clearinghouse for unidentified persons cases to be queried in database from around the United States. And yesterday, I did a quick search, and there are 11,274 examples of unidentified sets of remains that are in this country in medical examiners' offices, in coroners' offices, or in pauper cemeteries waiting to be identified. So there is a very big issue with identifying missing people, and lots of forensic anthropologists are interested in participating in identification efforts. So absolutely, we're very interested in this question related to missing people. So I thought that I would share a story for how it is that forensic anthropologists might contribute to a discussion about a missing person. And I want to talk about a case that I was privileged to work on when I was a graduate student at the University of Tennessee, which we have called, or begun to call, the case of Kathleen Wrinkle. Kathleen Wrinkle was a 27-year-old woman who disappeared on February 22nd, 1956, and was not recovered again for 52 years later when her remains were first found on May 9th, 2008. And it is an interesting story, which I will talk about. So, this is a Google Earth map, probably hard to see in the back, but this is from southeast Tennessee. Atlanta, smack dab in the middle, and about a couple hours due north is a very small rural community in southeast Tennessee. And on the morning of February 22nd, Kathleen Wrinkle got up to drive to a job interview that was about 40 miles away. Well, she never showed up. People thought, well, did she just get cold feet? She didn't want the job? No, she never got home. She wasn't there. Days go by, weeks go by, months go by, years go by. It's like she vanished off the face of the earth. At the time of her disappearance, she was engaged. She didn't have children. Her fiance moved on with his life, but her family never gave up hope that she would one day be recovered. And so they loosely kept pressure on authorities in Bradley County in southeast Tennessee to continue to keep her case open, to not let it sort of waste away in the dustbin of other cold cases. So a detective in 2007, 2008 got very interested to try to resolve this case and tried to retrace her steps. So they got the idea that looking at the route that she may have gone on, lo and behold, this road is right by a small lake in southeast Tennessee called Parksville Lake. So they said, we've exhausted all other possibilities. Let's look in the lake. Maybe we'll have some luck. They knew the model of the car that she was driving. They knew the license plate. They knew the whole story. So a dive team from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation was assembled. They went down into this lake called Parksville Lake. And lo and behold, X marks the spot. At this arrow, the 1951 Chevrolet Bel Air that she was driving was found 45 feet below the surface of the water. They reach in, it's pitch black, and they find one human bone. They bring it to the laboratory where my mentor was working, and he said, this is a human bone, go back and get the rest of whoever this person is. And so on that second dive date in 2008, they were able to recover these skeletonized remains of this individual in the car that matched, etc. Not only were these skeletonized remains recovered, but so were these personal effects. You can see examples from women's clothing, the women's glasses, a small remnant of a purse. And when we look at these remains, knowing what I just talked about, we're able to say, yep, these are the remains of a female. She was young, but that's not a positive ID. Well, in Texas, she has a brother who is still alive at the time. He was in his 80s, and he was able to provide a DNA sample. And so through some miracle, because DNA could probably degrade tomorrow if the context was right, but after 52 years at the bottom of this lake, lo and behold, the DNA was a match, and the medical examiner was able to sign off on her death certificate and ultimately return her remains to her family 52 years after her disappearance. And so it was quite a story. It was quite something that they never thought that they would see. And it was quite a multidisciplinary effort. And so what I thought I would do is I would read a little bit. In 2009, the Tennessee General Assembly put together one of those sort of House resolutions honoring all the people that were looking for this woman. And it was ratified by both houses of the Tennessee legislature and signed by the governor. It's House Resolution number 398. And they wrote, quote, that we honor and commend the dedicated professionals and volunteers who worked so assiduously to solve the mystery of Kathleen Wrinkle's disappearance, thereby allowing her family to finally put her to rest after 53 years of uncertainty. And so that's why I think what I do is about the coolest job that you can have. Forensic anthropology is really remarkable, and to be able to provide closure for people over half a century later is quite cool. So I'm about out of time. I'm going to give you a shameless plug if you want to know more. Miles Standish Hall, next week, English room, 8 o'clock. Thank you very much, and I would be delighted to take any questions. Sure.
I assume that the 11,000 people that you mentioned include those that are returned at ground zero.
No, those do not include ground zero fatalities. A couple of colleagues of mine work at the New York City Medical Examiner's Office, and those numbers, the World Trade Center population in and of itself is its own population of individuals. So those are not NamUs contexts.
Do you feel that at some point in time technology will progress enough that some of those people will be
We certainly think, one of the things about identifications in contexts like that is that, DNA is the way in which a small bone fragment the size of a quarter would be used to, say, identify someone. And DNA is one of the most rapidly changing areas of the forensic sciences. So what is not possible to get DNA out of a bone today may not be the case at some time in the future. So perhaps so. There probably are going to be instances of people from that context who are never identified just because of the fact that the temperatures are so hot and their remains are literally incinerated. And there's literally not a trace. So there probably are cases that, despite all of our best efforts and despite all the advances in my field and others, that sometimes people won't be, but there are going to be cases that we probably will continually hear that the number from World Trade probably gets a little bit smaller. Yeah.
So you said that you enjoy doing this job. It's like the coolest job you can possibly think of having. So do you think it's because of getting closure, or is it giving people closure?
I don't even know why. I remember as a freshman in college, there was a lecture on the skeleton in my intro anthropology class. So everybody take an intro anthropology class. And I just thought, that's what I'm going to do. I thought there was nothing more interesting to me than answering questions of archaeological importance, of questions of forensic importance, and to sort of do something very practical, while a lot of what scholars do is very, very theoretical, and we push theory in lots of interesting ways. I felt like doing forensic anthropology was something practical that was not going to just, wind up in an article that only me and 3 other people would read, but might actually have some bigger picture purpose. So that's also probably part of the reason why I got interested. Yeah.
So can you say something about how a person lived from looking at their bones?
Sometimes we can. So we can say a lot of things about how people lived. We can say about how people lived in the past and in the present day. So for example, we can look at people and understand something about their oral health by the amount of dental, the cavities that they've had or the amount of teeth that they've lost. Sometimes we can look at the robustness of their bones and say, there are some folks that have, in my field, that work on looking at the levels of stress that people have experienced and sort of the workloads associated. We can look at the chemistry of bones and see how people have moved around. So I had a student here at BU, I'll plug her, Emily's work. She worked on a Viking context in Sweden, and she was able to show by looking at tooth chemistry, actually collaborating with some folks from Earth and Environment here, that all the people in this cemetery from this island of Gotland were local people. They hadn't moved around because of the chemistry was something that they expected from a local region. So we can tell things from bones, we can tell things from teeth, we can tell things from the chemistry of the bones and teeth. I mean, people say, what can you learn from the bone? And like my joke is like, what can't you learn from a bone? So, I mean, it's really kind of an exciting thing to work on. Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of bones.
Yep.
And there is the character Angela who does facial reconstruction.
The Angelotron machine. Yeah.
So she does facial reconstruction, and I'm wondering if that is over-exaggerated in the show,
Oh boy,
or
that's one of my favorite questions.
Is it actually possible? And how
So
long
here's
does it
the
take?
thing about bones. Bones is on television, and we turn on TV, and we know that it's fiction, right? Like, it's our escape from our day of class or whatever. And so if we can watch a program like Bones and appreciate sort of the basics, it's awesome. But is there a hologram machine that Angela can like press and like magically make? Not in my lab here. Not in my lab here. We have some things, like we can take a CAT scan and we can do some really cool things. That takes like days and days and days in a supercomputer with a great processor. It's not something instantaneous, but like maybe the fact that you could like do something with a three-dimensional image of a bone, absolutely, but I can't make it like vaporize from the air into something cool.
But could you look at a face and like a skull and figure out immediately?
Create a face on that skull. There are people who specialize just in that, so that there are people that that both use clay and other kinds of electronic techniques to just create faces. Those people just create faces. So me and my job as a forensic anthropologist, their level of expertise in facial reconstruction is another level beyond even what I do. So that in and of itself is another specialty. The reality is, though, about that is that by the time we're trying to put a face on a skull, it's kind of the last-ditch effort, right? Because we're trying to put that skull in the newspaper, on a milk carton, on a billboard to say, does anybody even is there anything remotely that resembles, a person that you might have known or known that this person could be? So it's unfortunately sort of one of the last lines of trying to get someone identified. Sure, if I have time, sorry.
Was there any final decision about what happened to this woman who ended up in the lake?
Absolutely, yeah. That woman was buried near her. She had a funeral and she was buried not far from where her family in Southeast Tennessee still lived.
Did she just drive off the road?
Oh, what happened to her? You know what? Oh, what happened to her? You know what? That's one of those things we don't know. People have said that it was probably like a cold February morning, maybe a slick spot, and so that is the story that I think probably is how, we're going to remember that case. Thank you very, very much for your attention.